Hello, I'm Michael Arvidas. Today for Formation Period, we'll be doing our first activity as a part of Black History Month. Black History Month started in 1976 with President Ford. However, throughout the nation, it was not recognized formally until the 1990s. So some of you may ask, why are we actually studying Black History Month? To understand that, I think we also need to look at some of Holy Cross's values. Father Basil Moreau said, "We do not want our students to be ignorant of anything they should know. To that end, we shall avoid no sacrifice." And when you think about it, Black History Month is in that same mission. Black history started in 1619 with the first slave ship landing in Jamestown. From that point on, African Americans played an integral role in the history of this country. However, due to segregation, racism, and oppression, that story was not told for generations. Black history is American history, and that's an important thing to recognize. Racism exists in our country. It has existed since the country's inception. However, as a great man once said, the flames of racism can be extinguished in one generation. However, they can also ignite in that same generation. So as we study Black History Month, that is one of the things that we should be asking ourselves. Who are we as a school? Who are we as individuals? Who are we as Christians? Do we sit by idly? Or do we raise our voices up in unity with our brothers and sisters? Black History Month, like I said, started in 1619. The story of African Americans is one that is an American tale. When we think of American history, we often think about the triumphs. When the United States fought against Great Britain, they fought for their freedoms. They fought for individual rights. They fought for the right to vote. They fought against taxation from a foreign power. However, African Americans who fought in that war, both for the British and for the colonists, were still put back into servitude. The story of African Americans resembles that same story. Over the generations, whether it be in Turner's Rebellion or throughout the Civil War, African Americans fought for their freedom. Men like Frederick Douglass made it their point to end slavery. And while in 1865 slavery ended with the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, that did not end discrimination. Slavery gave way to sharecropping, to tenant farming. And then even further, while the 14th and 15th Amendments gave African Americans equal rights and the voting right, those rights were extinguished by Jim Crow in 1890. Court cases throughout the late 1800s diminished African Americans' rights throughout the United States. In the South, we saw segregation, segregated schools, segregated buses. Every part of American life was segregated based off of race. The worst part about this whole thing, when we look at this, is the stories that are just not told. The first African American governor in the history of the United States is from Louisiana. His name is PBS Pinchback. Most people don't know that because it's a single line in a Louisiana history textbook. Hiram Revels was one of the first U.S. senators elected from Mississippi. He was also the last African American senator elected from Mississippi as well. When you go along the line of African American history, you see triumph, you see struggle, you see America. And that is what we're talking about today. We're not just talking about one race. We're talking about the struggle of a country to deal with the original sin of this country, which was racial oppression. And while, yes, in the 1960s, we had a civil rights movement. We had Martin Luther's dream. We often forget that Martin Luther gave his life to that cause in 1968. We forget that at every turn, there was always an obstacle. Whether it be in the 1980s with rioting and police brutality, or the current decade where we're still seeing racial discrimination of different types. The only way this ends is if we talk about it. And so today in Formation Period, I challenge you to talk about oppression, talk about slavery, talk about Black history, talk about why it's relevant, talk about why this should be part of your education. The reality is, until the 2000s, really the 1990s, African American history was not put into most history textbooks in the South. Now, we do have representation, but we use this month to show that representation, put a highlight on it, because for so long, it was not shown in history. So what I want you guys to do today, listen to some testimonials. You're going to hear from Coach Jackson and a number of other teachers and some of your peers. Listen to their testimonies and then think about what it means to you to study other cultures. Why it is important to be a Holy Cross man and to love your brother, not just white ones, black ones, brown ones. It does not matter, because we're all equal in the eyes of God. So thank you, and I enjoy seeing this. We're going to have some videos for you guys that you can actually do on Flipgrid. So at the end of this, there'll be a link, and you can actually record your own thoughts. So good luck, gentlemen.
From the Constitutions of Holy Cross, our concern for the dignity of every human being as God's cherished child directs our care to victims of every injury, prejudice, famine, warfare, ignorance, infidelity, abuse, and natural calamity. Black History Month is an opportunity for our great nation to celebrate the many achievements and accomplishments of its African American citizens. You may wonder why this is important, and that's okay. I say this because many of these same achievements and accomplishments that we will celebrate this month came during a time when African Americans didn't have the same rights as everyone else. Take, for instance, it wasn't that long ago that we had segregated schools, different entrances to businesses, or even different seating arrangements in restaurants. Back then, African Americans even had to sit at the back of the bus. We couldn't even share the same water fountain with our fellow brothers and sisters. Despite having roadblocks and obstacles at every turn, the African American community still overcame and persevered. My fraternity brother, Dr. Charles Drew, invented a way for physicians to process and to preserve blood, plasma, allowing it to be stored and shipped for blood transfusion, leading to blood banks as we know today. Or George Washington Carver, the most prominent black scientist in the early 20th century, developed techniques to improve the soil for crops, which made life so much easier for farmers. He was also a leader in promoting environmentalism to preserve our world for generations to come. Or how about Katherine Johnson, who was a NASA employee that was critical to the success of the first U.S. crewed space flights. You may have learned about her story from the movie Hidden Figures. So there are so many more you can research and learn during this time. I'll leave you with this. You may have seen the famous picture of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. before. This picture was taken in 1964 at the famous Soldier Field in Chicago. The man next to Dr. King is the Reverend Theodore Hessberg. The Reverend Theodore Hessberg served as a Holy Cross priest for over 72 years and was president of Notre Dame University for 35 years. However, some of his most important work was making sure that there was equity and equality for all in our country. Most famously, he served as a member and chair of the United States Civil Rights Commission for numerous years. Father Hessberg famously addressed a crowd of an estimated 57,000 people who were there supporting Dr. King and the civil rights movement, and he used these words: "We want to strive for dignity with you." He linked arms with Dr. King to sing the movement's anthem, "We Shall Overcome." He also once said, "We share the same divine life that our Christ, our head. If we should despise another, we despise Christ." My brothers and sisters, let us be reminded that we must love God and neighbor as ourselves. These two commandments are inseparable. You cannot love God without loving your neighbor. So please take some time this month to learn about more African American history.
To me, Black History Month is very important because I think back to the quote of Isaac Newton about standing on the shoulders of giants. I feel like with Black History Month, we get this sort of inside view where we get to stand on the shoulders of, all these amazing Black legends who came and paved the way and give me and, my other African Americans in this country the rights that we have now. I think it's important that we pay homage to them and, tell them thank you, not just African Americans, but also people of all cultures and races, because, without these people, we would live in a country where we're not so multicultural, where we're just one cultural, and I think America would kind of lose its place as the greatest country on earth if it wasn't for this blending of cultures that we have, and a lot of that can be attributed to African Americans, fighting for rights in the 60s. The fight continues even to this day. Black people are still not equal in some regards with things like institutional racism, but we've continued fighting, and I think it's important. It's a shining example for all people, no matter what you may be going through, to keep fighting. And I think Black History Month is a great conduit for that, for people to, keep having hope.
To me, Black History Month is just a time to think about all the history that Black people have with this country and just how the country has changed from starting when Christopher Columbus first landed on this country to the slave plantations, and how much stuff and development that the Black community is involved with the foundation of this country. Just all the stuff that's happened over the years, and just the discrimination that's been going on in this country, and just the fight for equal rights, because common today, most people don't see or understand how equal rights is a problem because they don't see what's going on and how this month can really be something that brings people together and just the opening to people's eyes, because people need to learn history about other cultures and not just black cultures. It could be any other race that has immigrated to this country, but people just need to open their eyes to other people's problems and have unity, because we're all a family of Christ and God wanted us all to love each other, and that's what we should do. And we can love each other by learning about each other through this month of Black History Month.
Black History Month means a lot to me because it's not just Black history, it's American history. African Americans have contributed a lot to America, from the stoplight, which was invented by an African American, to serving in the wars. And not enough information is brought to our attention about what African Americans have contributed to this country from its very founding to now. Our first African American president was not elected until 2008. However, African Americans have been here since 1619. And that is a great disservice, and we must continue to work towards and learn about African American history.
Black History Month to me is important because I feel as if it's important for people to study those that fought for racial justice, and every person should study cultures to get understanding of everybody else that lives in this country. And we should acknowledge the fact that there is a problem of racism within this country because it's a part of our history. We should all come together and explain our differences and understandings so that we can have this sense of unity in this country, because America to me is important, even though we have our ups and downs. It's also important for people to study those that fought for, racial justice, such as Martin Luther King, of course, Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, and so many other prominent figures in our history. People have to understand that you can't ignore a problem that's ever so prevalent that's been going on since 1619 when our country's history started. You have to acknowledge the fact that it's still going on today, and we need to have this conversation about it, and it can't be ignored.
For me, Black history gives me hope, because when I read about Black stories of excellence and success, it reminds me that I too can achieve success and excellence despite the things that I go through in life as a Black person. And I think that it's especially important for non-Black people to indulge themselves in Black history and reading about Black figures of success and power, because in a culture surrounded by with heavy influence of Black excellence and Black leadership, I think it's important for non-Black people and everyone to understand the impact that Black people have in the society, and that Black history is not a thing of the past, but is a thing of right now and in the future, and that Black history is always around, it's always present, and is happening as we are speaking.
Black History Month is important to me because I base my thoughts and actions on the thoughts of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and his opinions on treating others based on their character, not based on their appearance. And because I use that principle throughout my life, that's why I think Black History Month is important, because people should not be judged by their appearance, but by their character.